In today's video, I'm going to build a fretless cigar box guitar, and spoiler alert, there's going to be a part 2 because things didn't work out exactly as I hoped. I've always been interested in fretless instruments because I think there's potentially so much musical expression that can be found between the notes on a standard piano. So this is going to be a lead or melodic focused instrument. It's only going to have 3 strings and not really intended for playing chords, but just for playing interesting melodies or lead lines with vibrato, slides, pitch bending, that sort of thing. So I ordered a big slab of myrtle wood off of eBay. I like myrtle wood because I think it has an interesting grain pattern, and it grows here in Oregon where I live, and it's considered to be pretty sustainable. I also ordered some other parts from a website called cbgiddy.com, which carries almost exclusively cigar box guitar parts. So I got this neck, which is a pre-made maple neck blank, and I just decided that even though I could build it on my own, I really wanted the neck to be straight. I also got some tuners, a 3-string bridge, a pair of bone nuts, I'll only use one of course, some chrome knobs, and a pre-wired humbucking pickup with volume, tone, and an input jack. So now I'm just taking some basic measurements like the width of the neck, the string spacing of the bridge, and the string spacing of the pickup, which luckily was the same as the string spacing of the bridge at 12 millimeters. For the fingerboard, I had a custom piece of aluminum cut because, at least on electric basses, a metal fingerboard can increase the sustain and make the tone brighter. Next, I took the neck and the slab of wood I'd used for the body and just sort of fiddled around with it with a ruler and a pencil, trying to figure out exactly how big I wanted everything to be, the scale length, the size of the body, etc. What I ultimately settled on was a 30 centimeter by 18.54 centimeter body, which happens to be the golden ratio, and the bridge will be right in the middle of that body. So with the measurements figured out, I took my plane and started preparing the piece of myrtle wood to be shaped into the rectangular body. This might be a good time to note that even though I'm calling this a cigar box guitar, it's going to be a solid body guitar, so it doesn't open up, it's not hollow, and it's not made out of a cigar box. So, cigar box guitar purists, please forgive me. Next, I used my Japanese saw to cut the rectangular shape of the body. It was actually really hard to cut, even though I was using the rip cutting side. Took forever, had to put it at a lot of strange angles, and eventually I did get through it all, but it took quite a while. Then I used a hand plane and an electric sander to quickly flatten down the surface. This is going to be a through neck instrument, so I'm actually going to cut a trough in the body for the neck to sit in. So here I am just marking that out. I used a chisel and a mallet to remove all the wood in the body where the neck would slide in. This was another pretty laborious process and very exacting because I wanted a nice tight fit, but eventually I got through it with the help of a router plane. In somewhat of a shock, the neck actually ended up fitting really well, which was a pleasant surprise to say the least. Even though I cut the groove for the body entirely with hand tools, I do own an electric router. I'm using it here to give the corners of the body a nice, even round over. I just don't really like using the powered router because it's loud, it's messy, it seems kind of dangerous, and I just like using hand tools more. But this case was the right tool for the job. And so with the body all shaped, it's time to glue the neck in. And so that's it for the first day of work. Next, I need to glue on the fingerboard and add all the hardware. I really had no idea how to attach the fingerboard to the neck, but I followed ChatGPT's instructions and roughed up the back of the fingerboard, cut it to length, and filed off some of the sharp corners. Then I used some 2-part epoxy to actually affix the fingerboard to the neck. Now it's time to lay out all the hardware. So I figured out where I wanted the knobs and input jacks to go and drilled holes for them. I built a cover for the control cavity using a scrap piece of 1/4-inch oak, and I did break down and use the powered router to route out the control cavity. It's not perfect, but it'll work. Just don't tell Steve Jobs it's so sloppy inside. Next, I'm positioning the tuners on the headstock. This isn't too precise a process, so I just made them evenly spaced out and drilled holes for them. Next, I used a rasp to shape the neck a little bit so it would feel better in the hand. Then I used some painter's tape to protect the neck and gave the whole thing a good sanding down. Then I glued in the nut with some super glue. Next, I started laying out where I wanted the bridge, and that's where I ran into my first major problem with this project. The aluminum fingerboard is really thin, and since the neck is flush with the body, the bridge makes the strings way too high, especially for a fretless instrument. So I had to chisel out a valley for the bridge to sit in, and even though that worked, it's just not really ideal. Anyway, next I figured out where I wanted the pickup to go and started chiseling out a cavity for it. Luckily, it ended up fitting without too much of a headache. Next, it was time to refine and polish the fingerboard. I started by using a file to really round out the edge where the fingerboard meets the wood. I actually dug into the wood just a little bit on purpose to really round it out and make the connection smooth. I used a progression of wet-dry sandpaper to smooth out the fingerboard. Then I used some polishing compound and a microfiber cloth to really make it sparkle. Then I applied a layer of microcrystalline wax to prevent oxidation. I thought it would look really nice if, to go with the aluminum fingerboard, the rest of the guitar was painted black. So I used some black general dye stain to cover all the wood surfaces. Then as a final coat, I used some satin polyurethane finish. After measuring out the 12mm string spacing, I used files to cut slots for the nut. I installed the bridge, shielded the pickup cavity with copper tape, and soldered the pickups to the control knobs. Finally, it's time to put on some strings. I'm going to use a D string, A string, and B string tuned up to C, so it's going to be kind of like the middle of a standard guitar in pitch. Time to plug it into an amp and try it out. I was really happy that it worked at all. All the knobs worked. And the aluminum fingerboard actually felt really good playing those characteristic bendy notes. So I tuned it up so I could play some more. It's actually really enjoyable to play, except for one problem. Nothing below what would be about the 5th fret makes a clean sound. And it's kind of hard to see here, but the problem is there's an upward bow in the neck that's causing the strings to buzz. So, unfortunately, this neck doesn't have a truss rod so that I could adjust that. And there's really no way to add one after the fact without basically tearing apart the whole guitar. So, in part 2, I'm going to build the whole thing again. I'm going to add a truss rod to the neck, and I'm going to make sure that there's enough relief from the fingerboard so that I don't have to route out a cavity for the bridge. So even though I'm rebuilding basically the entire thing, I'm not too frustrated. The fingerboard actually feels really good and sounds good, at least on the higher notes, and it's really fun to play. I think it looks pretty cool too. Considering I was totally winging it and really had no idea what I was doing while I was building it, I'm pretty happy with this as a prototype. So stay tuned for next time when I improve the design and maybe even learn to play it in tune.